Warning, the following content is rated WTF-ITS for what the fuck is this shit, and may contain pointless ramblings about nerdy nonsense.
Well, the big discussion happening this week centers around Ready at Dawn's new PlayStation exclusive release, The Order 1886. It's been getting a lot of flack from critics for being dull and poorly paced, while another debate is being had by players about the game's supposed short length. Some rumors have spread around that the game only clocks in at about 5 hours of content, and there is no multiplayer mode or additional content to keep you coming back. On the other hand, I've heard some counter-arguments that this is only true if you play through the game as fast as you can while skipping side quests and other additional content within the campaign. But regardless of the game's actual length, I think this is a good segue into a more general discussion about what should and shouldn't be an acceptable length for gameplay time. I want to start off by saying though that overall I think too much emphasis is placed on game length nowadays, though it also doesn't help that there now exist exploitative DLC schemes that might have exacerbated this issue. In the old days, when a game was released, it was generally considered complete as is. There was no internet, no patches to fix bugs, and no DLC to expand the amount of content in the game, so developers couldn't just get away with cutting corners and fixing problems with their games months later down the road while charging you extra for it. Now it seems like everyone has to be on high alert about the amount of content they're getting because it is so easy for developers to just cut something out of the game that would have been in there at release if it weren't for the fact that they can now just cut it out instead and charge extra for it as DLC. As a quick aside, this is one of the reasons why I just hate the concept of DLC in general though, and I don't think it should exist as a content delivery method at all. If developers want to release more content for a game, it should come in the form of a worthwhile expansion pack that adds a significant amount of gameplay, like Blizzard Entertainment's expansion release paradigm. But getting back to the topic at hand, when it comes right down to it, I would much rather pay $60 for a game that is a 5-hour blast to play as opposed to a 30-hour generally mediocre experience. Quality of content is far more important than quantity, but at the same time I would be lying if I said that quantity doesn't matter at all. At the end of the day, if a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, turned out to be only half an hour long, and I went to the movie theater to watch it, I would come out of that theater feeling a bit cheated out of my money, as I'm sure many other people would. So length of content does matter, but I think there's a lot of other factors we should consider before writing something off as too short. When it comes to video games in particular, one of the first things I consider is the genre. Video games, unlike movies, don't have a consistent standard where they almost all fall into a typical length of 1.5 to 2.5 hours regardless of genre. With video games, the experience can range anywhere from 5 minutes to literally 200 hours of content. Simple puzzle-solving games meant to be played in short bursts, like Tetris for example, are only going to be 5 minutes on average, while an MMORPG like World of Warcraft can easily surpass 200 hours. It would be completely unreasonable to expect a game like Tetris to offer the same amount of content as World of Warcraft. The genre just doesn't lend itself to offering that much to the player. But with that being said, this is also where pricing should come into play. Since Tetris is such a short game, it would also be unreasonable to charge the same $60 price tag as a full-fledged AAA title. So as long as developers are properly scaling their prices to the experience you're getting, it's okay to trim the length. As another example, Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes was priced cheaper at launch than a typical AAA game, despite offering AAA production values because the campaign only clocked in at around roughly 2 hours. This makes sense given that you're getting less content than normal for a game of that particular genre. But at some point there is a cutoff for me that usually falls at around 4 to 5 hours of gameplay, and at that point the amount of content in proportion to the price tag starts to matter far less than the quality of content. Zone of the Enders, the second runner, is a mecha action game that I'd say probably only clocks in around 4 hours, but in that 4 hours you will experience some of the most intense and satisfying mecha combat ever, along with an interesting story that has a large sweeping scope and climactic conclusion. By the time I got to the end of the game, even though I knew it was short, I didn't feel cheated out of my money in the slightest, even though the game was given a full AAA price tag at the time. When it comes right down to it, quality ultimately trumps quantity, so I think the issue is a bit more complicated than just boiling down to a simple price per hour formula. However, I think experimenting with different price points is something that more developers should consider looking into, as there's technically no law that says your game must hit that $60 gold standard, and this could help alleviate problems with many modern games too. A common bad trend I've noticed with the industry is a formula where the game starts out very engaging and story-driven. The developers really try hard to suck you into it, but then after the first couple of hours or so, the gameplay quickly drops off a cliff and is padded out with tons of repetition, usually in the form of performing pointless mundane tasks or grinding out armies of baddies that you have to kill. Eventually the gameplay might start to pick up some steam again towards the end if you're lucky, but generally speaking, all this filler and padding adds up to greatly damaging the overall gameplay experience if it is overused enough, and in no franchise can I think of a better example of this than Assassin's Creed. This is particularly noticeable in the first game, where it starts off incredibly engaging and story-driven, full of mystery and intrigue, interesting characters, and well-paced gameplay. But then about a couple hours into the game, the story just evaporates and it mostly leaves you to your own devices. All you can do is travel from city to city performing lots of mundane tasks for people around town until you acquire enough information to track your real assassination target. It's all very repetitious and predictable and not particularly engaging. Because of this, the game really went from a day one purchase to maybe a rental at best in terms of its value. And the franchise has never really been able to pull itself out of this rut. Even when the series was at its best in Assassin's Creed 2, there was still a large segment throughout the middle of the game that eventually devolved into needless tedium. But that's just it. How about instead of filling these games up with boring padding, just adjust the price tag according to the amount of worthwhile content in the game? Cut out all the padding of Assassin's Creed 2 and make it several hours shorter, but then charge $20 to $30 less for it. I think this would have been a much better alternative than what we got, and it would have been a stronger game for it. Adding content purely for the sake of having more content doesn't necessarily make a better game. But jumping back to the Order 1886 for a moment, I think it's rather interesting that people are making a big deal out of this game's length in particular, as there's been plenty of single-player games before it that offer similar amounts of content. I think perhaps what is going on is that people are mistaking lack of quality content for lack of quantity, because if the game were as consistently exciting as something like Zone of the Enders 2, I'm sure there would be a lot less complaint about the game's length. But who knows, I haven't actually had a chance to play the game yet myself. So what do you think? Does game length matter? And if it does, how does it factor into your purchasing decisions? Leave a comment below and let me know.
Let's play a game. Click the subscribe button to win. Wow, you really suck at this game, don't you? It's right fucking there. Just click on the button. What a noob lord. Get on my level, loser.